The elderly caregiver was fired after a negligence accusation, but the millionaire heard her say 3 words. They were the same words his daughter used to say before she disappeared 25 years ago. The grandfather clock in Edward Langford's study chimed 11 times, each resonant note echoing through the cavernous halls of his Greenwich mansion like a funeral bell. He didn't look up from the amber liquid swirling in his crystal tumbler, the same Macallan 25 he'd been nursing for the past 2 hours. Outside, Connecticut's autumn rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, but Edward heard only the sound that had haunted him for 25 years. Silence. The kind of silence that comes after a 5-year-old's laughter suddenly stops. His study was a monument to success. Leather-bound first editions lined mahogany shelves. Oil paintings of clipper ships adorned the walls, and his mahogany desk bore the weight of contracts that had built his real estate empire. Forbes had called him the king of American property development. The Wall Street Journal had featured him on 3 covers, but none of that mattered now. Success felt hollow when you had no one to share it with. Edward's fingers traced the silver frame on his desk, the only photograph he could bear to keep visible. Sophie at 4 years old, gap-toothed and giggling, her blonde curls catching the sunlight as she sat on the tire swing he'd hung from the old oak tree. Her eyes, so much like his own, sparkled with the kind of joy that made the world seem perfect. "Daddy, watch me fly." Her voice still echoed in his memory, clear as the day she'd said it. That was the last normal day they'd had together, the day before everything changed. The liquor burned his throat as he drained the glass, but it did nothing to numb the pain that had taken root in his chest like a malignant tumor. Dr. Morrison had warned him about the drinking, about the stress, about the way he'd isolated himself from everyone who'd once mattered. But what was the point of living when the only person who'd ever truly needed him was gone? He pushed back from his desk and walked to the window, his reflection a ghost against the dark glass. At 62, Edward looked older than his years. His once thick brown hair had gone completely silver, and deep lines etched his face like a roadmap of grief. His designer suit hung loose on his frame. He'd lost weight again, forgetting to eat for days at a time. The estate stretched out before him, manicured lawns and pristine gardens that cost more to maintain than most people made in a year. But the tire swing still hung from the oak tree, weathered and rotting, because he couldn't bear to have it removed sometimes. Late at night, he'd catch himself staring out at it, waiting for a little girl who would never come home. September 15th, 1998. The date was burned into his memory like a brand. Sophie had been playing in the garden while he took a business call. Just 15 minutes, he'd told himself. 15 minutes that had stretched into an eternity of regret. When he'd looked out the window, the garden was empty. The gate stood open, swinging gently in the breeze. They'd searched for months. The FBI, private investigators, bloodhounds, helicopters. Every lead had gone cold. Every hope had died. Mr. Langford. The voice belonged to Detective Martinez, the lead investigator who'd become as familiar as family during those first terrible months. "We've exhausted every avenue sometimes. Sometimes people just disappear." But Edward had never accepted that. He'd hired private investigators for years, chasing shadows and false leads across the country. Each dead end had felt like losing Sophie all over again. The worst part wasn't the not knowing, it was the knowing. The terrible certainty that he'd failed her, that his inattention, his obsession with business, his inability to protect the most precious thing in his world, had cost his daughter her life. Evelyn had blamed him, of course. His ex-wife's accusations had been surgical in their precision, cutting straight to the heart of his deepest fears. "You were supposed to be watching her, Edward. You were supposed to keep her safe." Their marriage had crumbled within 6 months. How could it not? Every conversation had become a minefield of blame and recrimination. Every silence had been filled with Sophie's absence when Evelyn had finally moved out. Taking nothing but her clothes and her contempt, Edward had felt something close to relief. That relief had lasted exactly 1 day before the real loneliness set in. Now, 25 years later, Edward Langford was worth nearly $2 billion and owned properties in every major city in America. He had everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. The mansion that had once been filled with Sophie's laughter had become his prison, its golden walls closing in a little more each year. The phone rang, jarring him from his reverie. Thomas Granger's name appeared on the caller ID. His lawyer, his business partner, and the closest thing he had to a friend. "Edward, you missed the board meeting again." "I know." Edward didn't bother with pleasantries. "Handle it. This is the third one this month. The shareholders are getting nervous." "Let them be nervous, the company runs itself." Thomas's sigh was audible through the phone. "When's the last time you left that house? When's the last time you saw another human being?" Edward almost laughed. Thomas had been asking the same questions for years, as if repetition might eventually break through the wall Edward had built around himself. "I see Maria." The housekeeper came twice a week, though she'd learned not to try to engage him in conversation. "Maria doesn't count. You need to get out, Edward. You need to live again." Live again. The words felt foreign, like a language he'd once known but forgotten. "I'm fine where I am." "No, you're not. You're dying in that house, and Sophie wouldn't want." "Don't." Edward's voice cut through the phone like a blade. "Don't tell me what she would want. Don't pretend you know." The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of the same argument. Finally, Thomas spoke again, his voice gentler. "The cardiologist called. You missed your appointment." Edward had forgotten. Again, Dr. Morrison had been monitoring his heart for months, concerned about the irregular rhythms that had started after his last panic attack. Stress-induced arrhythmia, he'd called it. Edward called it justice. "I'll reschedule. Will you? Because Maria found you passed out in your study last week. You could have died, Edward." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Edward closed his eyes, remembering the crushing weight in his chest, the way the room had spun before everything went black. He'd woken up on the Persian rug, Maria's worried face hovering over him like an angel of mercy. Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing, he whispered. "Don't say that. Don't ever say that." But Edward was already pulling the phone away from his ear, already severing the connection that tethered him to the world of the living. Thomas would call back. He always did, but Edward would let it ring. He walked to the bar cart and poured another scotch, his hands shaking slightly. The tremor had started a few weeks ago, another sign that his body was betraying him. Everything was falling apart, piece by piece, and he couldn't bring himself to care. The pain hit him like a freight train. Edward dropped the glass, watching it shatter on the marble floor as he clutched his chest. The room tilted, and he reached for the desk, his vision blurring at the edges. His heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird, each beat irregular and terrifying. "Not yet," he thought desperately. "Not before I find her." But his body had other plans. The floor rushed up to meet him, and Edward Langford, master of his universe, collapsed in his golden prison, alone with his ghosts and his regrets. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, marking another day in his 25-year vigil. Outside, the tire swing creaked in the wind, still waiting for a little girl who would never come home. Or so he thought. The mountain air in Aspen carried the crisp promise of winter. Even in early October, Olivia Carver pulled her worn wool coat tighter as she walked up the cobblestone path to Sunrise Recovery Center, her breath forming small clouds in the thin Colorado air. The clinic was nothing like the sterile hospitals she'd worked in before. This place looked more like a luxury resort, with its log cabin architecture and stunning views of the Rocky Mountains. Rich people even get sick in style, she thought, adjusting the strap of her second-hand leather bag. At 28, Olivia had learned to navigate worlds that weren't meant for people like her. She'd grown up in a tiny apartment above Marjorie Ellis's diner in Durango, where every dollar was stretched until it screamed. But Marjorie had raised her to believe that kindness was the only currency that truly mattered, and that philosophy had served Olivia well in her nursing career. "You must be our new angel," said a warm voice behind her. Olivia turned to find Dr. Sarah Chen, the clinic's director, approaching with a genuine smile. She was a petite woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a professional bun. "Olivia Carver," she said, extending her hand. "Though I'm not sure about the angel part. Trust me, after what we've been dealing with lately, you're exactly what we need." Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. "I assume you read the file on Edward Langford?" Olivia nodded. The file had been thin on medical details but heavy on warnings. Difficult patient, resistant to treatment, history of verbal aggression toward staff. It painted a picture of a man who'd given up on life, which made Olivia's heart ache more than it should have. He's been here for 3 days since his cardiac episode. Dr. Chen continued as they walked toward the main building. We've had 2 nurses quit, and 3 others refuse to work with him. He doesn't speak, doesn't cooperate with treatment, and when he does acknowledge our existence, it's usually to tell us to leave him alone. They entered the lobby, a warm space filled with natural light and the scent of pine. Everything was designed to feel more like a high-end retreat than a medical facility, but Olivia could see the subtle security measures, reinforced doors, cameras and staff who moved with the practiced efficiency of people used to handling volatile situations. "Why do you think I'll be different?" Olivia asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd always been drawn to the broken ones, the patients everyone else had written off. Marjorie used to say she had a gift for seeing the hurt beneath the anger. "Because," Dr. Chen said, stopping at the elevator, "you're the only one who applied for the position after we explained what you'd be dealing with. That tells me you're either crazy or exactly what he needs." The elevator rose to the 3rd floor, where the VIP suites were located. The hallway was quiet, carpeted in deep burgundy with paintings of mountain landscapes lining the walls. It felt more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility, but Olivia supposed that was the point. Rich people didn't want to be reminded they were sick. "He's in the penthouse suite," Dr. Chen explained. "Full kitchen, living area, private balcony. We're hoping familiar comforts will help him cooperate with treatment." They stopped at the end of the hall, where 2 doors marked the entrance to the suite. Dr. Chen knocked gently before using her keycard. "Mr. Langford, I'd like you to meet Olivia Carver, your new nurse." The suite was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the mountains, and the furnishings were elegant but comfortable. But Olivia's attention was immediately drawn to the man sitting in the leather chair by the window. Edward Langford looked nothing like the powerful businessman she'd expected. His expensive pajamas hung loose on his frame, and his silver hair was uncombed, but it was his eyes that stopped her cold. They held a depth of pain that made her chest tighten. She'd seen that look before, in the mirror during her own darkest moments. "Mr. Langford," she said softly, approaching his chair. "I'm Olivia. I'm going to be taking care of you." He didn't acknowledge her presence, continuing to stare out the window with the intensity of a man waiting for something that would never come. Dr. Chen cleared her throat. "Well, I'll leave you 2 to get acquainted, Olivia. His medication schedule is on the table, and the call button is—" "I know where it is," Olivia said, her eyes never leaving Edward's face. "We'll be fine." After Dr. Chen left, Olivia settled into the chair across from Edward. She didn't speak, didn't try to force conversation. Instead, she pulled out her knitting, a half-finished scarf in soft blue wool, and began to work. The rhythmic clicking of needles filled the silence. 20 minutes passed before Edward's curiosity finally got the better of him. "What are you doing?" His voice was hoarse from disuse. "Making a scarf," Olivia said without looking up. "Winter's coming, and I always forget to buy one until it's too late. You're supposed to be monitoring my vitals or something. Your vitals are fine, your heart rate is steady, your color is good, and you're breathing normally. What you need isn't medical attention. It's someone to sit with you so you don't feel so alone." Edward's head turned slightly, just enough to catch her peripheral vision. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." Olivia's needles continued their steady rhythm. "I know you're in pain. I know you've been in pain for a long time. And I know that everyone who's tried to help you has approached you like you're a problem to be solved instead of a person who's hurting. And you're different. I'm the person who's going to sit here with you. Whether you want me to or not, I'm going to make sure you take your medications, eat your meals, and get some rest. And I'm not going to pretend I can fix whatever's broken inside you, because that's not my job. My job is to make sure you're not alone while you figure out how to fix it yourself." Something flickered in Edward's eyes. Surprise. Maybe. Or the faintest hint of interest. "Most people don't last a day with me. Most people probably think you're the problem," Olivia said, finally looking up from her knitting. "I think you're just tired. Tired of pretending you're okay. Tired of people trying to make you feel better. Tired of carrying whatever weight you've been carrying. Am I right?" Edward stared at her for a long moment, and Olivia saw something shift in his expression. Not trust exactly, but a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. "You talk too much," he said finally, but there was no bite in his words. "Marjorie always said the same thing. She was the woman who raised me. Not my birth mother, but the one who mattered, she used to say. I could talk the ear off a cornstalk, but that sometimes talking was the only thing that kept the darkness at bay. What happened to her? Cancer, 3 years ago. Olivia's needles paused for just a moment. She fought it for 2 years, and I took care of her at home. That's actually how I got into nursing. I wanted to understand what she was going through, wanted to help other families who were dealing with the same thing. I'm sorry. The simple words, spoken with genuine feeling, made Olivia's throat tighten. Thank you. She was everything to me, the only family I ever had. Edward was quiet for a long time, processing this information. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. You said she wasn't your birth mother. No, she found me when I was little. I don't remember much about before. I was hurt, confused, and she took me in. Never had children of her own. But she loved me like I was her own flesh and blood. Olivia's hands stilled on her knitting. She saved my life in every way that mattered. And now you're trying to save mine? No, Olivia said firmly. I'm trying to make sure you don't give up on yourself. There's a difference. Edward leaned back in his chair, studying her with newfound interest. How old are you? 28? Old enough to know that pain doesn't have an expiration date, but young enough to believe that it doesn't have to be permanent either. You're very wise for 28. I'm very tired for 28, Olivia corrected. But Marjorie taught me that being tired and being defeated are two different things. You can rest when you're tired, but you can't rest when you're defeated. And which one am I? Olivia looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the defeat in his shoulders, the resignation in his eyes, the way he held himself like a man who'd already given up. But she also saw something else, something that made her heart skip, a flicker of hope, so small she almost missed it. You're tired, she said finally. Very, very tired. But you're still breathing, still fighting, still here. That tells me you're not ready to give up yet. Edward's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. You don't understand what I've done, what I've failed to do. Then tell me, Olivia said simply. I've got all the time in the world. 2 weeks had passed since Olivia first sat in Edward Langford's suite, and the change was subtle but unmistakable. The man who'd refused to speak to anyone was now asking for her specifically when she arrived each morning. The untouched breakfast trays had been replaced by empty plates, and the medications that had been hidden under his tongue were now taken willingly. You're becoming quite the miracle worker, Dr. Chen observed, as she and Olivia reviewed Edward's chart in the hallway. His vitals have stabilized. He's gained 3 pounds, and yesterday I actually heard him laugh. Olivia smiled, remembering the moment she'd been telling him about one of Marjorie's more colorful customers at the diner, a regular named Frank, who insisted on paying for his coffee with Canadian pennies and convinced stories about his days as a rodeo star. Edward's laughter had been rusty with disuse, but it had been real. He just needed someone to listen, Olivia said, though she knew it was more complicated than that. Edward was still carrying whatever burden had broken him, but he'd started to trust her with pieces of it as she entered his suite that morning. Olivia found Edward standing at the window, fully dressed for the first time since she'd known him. He wore dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that brought out the silver in his hair, and he looked more like the successful businessman she'd heard about. Look at you, she said, setting down her bag. Ready to rejoin the world. Dr. Chen says I can go home next week if I keep improving. Edward's tone was neutral, but Olivia caught the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. I'm not sure I'm ready. Home can be the hardest place to heal, Olivia said, understanding more than he knew. All those memories waiting in familiar places. Edward nodded, moving to his usual chair. Tell me about Marjorie's diner again. You made it sound like the center of the universe. Olivia settled into her chair, pulling out her knitting. She'd finished the blue scarf and started a new one in soft green wool. Edward's color, she'd decided, though she'd never told him that. It was, in our little corner of it, she said. Ellis's Diner, right on Main Street in Durango. Nothing fancy. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox that only played country music, and the best apple pie in 3 counties. Marjorie knew everyone's name, their coffee order, and usually their troubles too. She sounds like she was born to take care of people. She was. But she'd tell you she learned it the hard way. Olivia's needles clicked steadily. She grew up in foster care, bounced around from family to family until she aged out of the system. said it taught her that everyone needs a safe place to land. Edward was quiet for a moment, processing this. Is that why she took you in? Because she knew what it felt like to be alone. I think so. She never talked much about finding me, just that I was hurt and scared and needed someone to love me. She used to say that love wasn't about blood, it was about choice. She chose me, and I chose her back. What do you remember about before? Olivia's hands stilled on her knitting. It was a question she'd been asking herself more often lately, especially since working with Edward. His pain seemed to echo something deep inside her, like a song she'd forgotten but could almost remember. Not much. I was young, maybe 4 or 5. I remember being cold and hungry, and there was darkness, like being in a place with no light. She shook her head. Marjorie said I had some kind of head injury when she found me. The doctors said it could affect my memory. But you do remember some things. Fragments. I remember a swing, I think, and someone singing to me, a man's voice deep and warm. He used to call me... Olivia paused, her throat tightening. He used to call me Sunshine. Edward's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down, his hand shaking slightly. Sunshine. I know it sounds silly. Marjorie said I used to ask for the Sunshine Man when I first came to live with her. She thought maybe it was my father, but there was no way to know for sure. Do you ever wish you could find him, your real family? Olivia looked up from her knitting to find Edward watching her with unusual intensity. His face had gone pale, and something in his eyes made her heart skip. Sometimes, she admitted, but Marjorie was my real family. She's the one who raised me, who loved me, who taught me how to be a person. Blood doesn't make a family. Love does. That's very wise. Marjorie's wisdom, not mine. She had a lot of sayings like that. Her favorite was something she used to whisper to me when I had nightmares. Light, flower, and wind, she said. It meant that even in the darkest times, there was always something beautiful to hold on to. Edward's sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. The color drained from his face completely, and for a moment, Olivia thought he might faint. Edward, are you okay? I'm fine, he said, but his voice was strained. That's a beautiful saying. Very unique. Marjorie said she didn't know where it came from. She thought maybe I remembered it from before, because I used to say it in my sleep. It became our special thing. Whenever I was scared or sad, she'd whisper it to me. Edward stood abruptly, walking to the window with jerky movements. Olivia could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Edward, what's wrong? Nothing, I need some air. He stepped onto the balcony, and Olivia followed, concerned. The mountain air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and the distant promise of snow. Talk to me, she said gently. What happened just now? Edward gripped the railing, his knuckles white. That phrase, light, flower, and wind. Do you remember anything else about it where you might have heard it? No, but... Olivia hesitated, then decided to trust him with the truth. Lately, I've been having dreams, since I started working here, actually. Strange dreams about a garden, and a man crying, and that phrase echoing in my head. I know it sounds crazy, but sometimes I feel like I'm remembering something important. What kind of garden? A beautiful one. Manicured lawns, perfect flower beds, and this huge oak tree with a tire swing. In the dream, I'm swinging and laughing, and someone is pushing me. A man with kind eyes and gentle hands. He's saying something, but I can never quite make out the words. Edward's breathing had become shallow, and Olivia could see tears gathering in his eyes. Edward, you're scaring me. What's going on? I had a daughter, he said quietly, his voice breaking. She disappeared 25 years ago. She was 5 years old and He stopped, unable to continue. Oh, Edward. Olivia's heart broke for him. I'm so sorry. I can't imagine what that must have been like. She used to love that swing. I pushed her on it every evening after work, and when she was scared at night, I'd tuck her in and whisper the same thing every time. Light, flower, and wind. It was our special saying, something I made up just for her. The words hit Olivia like a physical blow. The world tilted, and she gripped the balcony railing for support. That's impossible. Her name was Sophie, Edward continued. his voice barely above a whisper. Sophie Langford. She had blonde curls and blue eyes, and she called me Daddy. But sometimes, when she was being silly, she'd call me her Sunshine Man, because I always told her she was my sunshine. Olivia's legs gave out, and she sank onto the balcony chair, her mind reeling. The dreams, the fragments of memory, the way Edward's pain had felt so familiar. It was all clicking into place like pieces of a puzzle she'd been trying to solve her entire life. But I'm not. I can't be, she whispered. 28 years old, Edward said, turning to face her. Found as a child, hurt and with no memory, raised by a woman who loved you like her own, and you know our special phrase, the one I never told another living soul. They stared at each other across the balcony, two broken people who might have just found the missing pieces of themselves. The mountain wind whispered through the pine trees, carrying with it the weight of 25 years of grief and hope. I need to call Thomas, Edward said finally. My lawyer, if there's even a chance. Edward, this is crazy. I'm not your daughter. I'm just a nurse from Durango with a head full of dreams and a heart full of someone else's memories. But even as she said it, Olivia knew it wasn't true. The recognition in Edward's eyes, the way her heart had recognized his pain from the moment she'd seen him. It was all too much to be coincidence. Maybe, Edward said, his voice filled with a hope so fragile it might shatter if they spoke too loud. But maybe you're not. The atmosphere at Sunrise Recovery Center had shifted over the past week. Olivia could feel it in the way conversations stopped when she entered a room, in the sideways glances from other staff members, and most notably, in the increasingly hostile stares from Diane Whitlow, the head nurse. Diane had been with the clinic for 15 years, working her way up from a junior position to become doctor. Chen's right hand, she prided herself on running the nursing staff with military precision, and she didn't appreciate disruptions to her carefully ordered world. Olivia's success with Edward Langford, a patient who'd driven away every other nurse, was exactly the kind of disruption that made Diane's jaw clench. She's getting too close to the patients, Diane muttered to her assistant, Jenny, as they watched Olivia through the window of Edward's suite. It's unprofessional. Jenny, a sweet girl fresh out of nursing school, shifted uncomfortably. But Mr. Langford is doing so much better. His vitals are stable. He's eating, taking his medications. Any nurse could have achieved those results with proper protocol. Diane snapped. What she's doing isn't nursing, it's friendship. This is a medical facility, not a therapy session. But Diane's real concern wasn't professional standards. It was fear. Fear that Olivia's natural warmth and intuitive care would make her own rigid. By the book approach seem cold and outdated. Fear that Dr. Chen would start questioning why other difficult patients weren't responding as well to traditional treatment methods. Fear that 15 years of carefully built authority could crumble in the face of genuine compassion, inside the suite. Olivia was helping Edward with his morning routine, their conversation flowing naturally despite the earth-shattering revelation from the day before. They'd agreed to keep their suspicions private until Thomas Granger could arrange for discreet DNA testing, but the knowledge hung between them like a charged wire. Tell me more about Marjorie's diner, Edward said, as Olivia checked his blood pressure. What was your favorite part about growing up there? The stories, Olivia said without hesitation. Every customer had a story, and Marjorie had a way of making them feel safe enough to share. There was this one regular, Mrs. Patterson, who came in every Tuesday for coffee and pie. She'd been widowed for 10 years and she was so lonely, but Marjorie would sit with her for hours just listening. And you learn to listen by watching her. She used to say that everyone carries invisible wounds. The person who's rude to you might be grieving. The one who seems angry might just be scared. She taught me to look for the hurt beneath the surface. Edward's smile was soft, but tinged with sadness. She sounds like she was an extraordinary woman. She was. I just wish. Olivia paused, her throat tightening. I wish I could tell her about this. About possibly finding my family. She always said she hoped I'd find my roots someday. Maybe she knows, Edward said gently. Maybe she's been watching over you, guiding you to where you needed to be. The moment was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Diane entered without waiting for permission, her expression stern and professional. Ms. Carver, I need to speak with you. Immediately. Olivia's stomach clenched at the tone. Can it wait? I'm not finished with Mr. Langford's morning care. No, it cannot wait. Dr. Chen is waiting for us in her office now. Edward sat up straighter, his business instincts kicking in. What's this about? Nothing that concerns you, Mr. Langford, Diane said coldly. Miss Carver, let's go. The walk to Dr. Chen's office felt like a death march. Olivia's mind raced through everything she'd done over the past few weeks, searching for any mistake, any breach of protocol that could have triggered this kind of response. But she came up empty. She'd been meticulous about Edward's care, following every procedure to the letter. Dr. Chen's office was typically warm and welcoming, but today it felt like a courtroom. The director sat behind her desk, her expression unreadable, while Diane took a position near the window like a prosecutor preparing to make her case. Please, sit down, Olivia, Dr. Chen said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. What's this about? Olivia asked, though she was dreading the answer. We've received some concerning reports about your conduct with Mr. Langford, Dr. Chen said carefully. Reports that suggest you may have been negligent in your duties. Olivia's blood ran cold. Negligent, how? Diane stepped forward, pulling out a tablet. Yesterday at 3:47 p.m., you administered Mr. Langford's afternoon medications. According to the automated dispensing system, you accessed his metoprolol but failed to ensure he actually took it. That's not true, Olivia said, her voice rising. I watched him take every pill just like I do every day. Then how do you explain this? Diane turned the tablet toward Olivia, showing what appeared to be security footage from Edward's suite. The image was grainy, but it seemed to show Olivia handing Edward his medication cup and then turning away before he brought it to his mouth. I don't understand, Olivia whispered, studying the footage. This doesn't look right. The timestamp, the angle. Are you suggesting our security system is malfunctioning? Diane's voice was sharp with accusation. I'm saying I know what I did. I watched Edward take his medication, the same way I have every day for 2 weeks. Doctor. Chen leaned forward, her expression troubled. There's more, Olivia. We found Mr. Langford's evening dose of metoprolol in his bathroom trash can. It appears he's been discarding his heart medication without your knowledge. What? Olivia's mind reeled. That's impossible. His vitals have been stable. If he wasn't taking his heart medication, we'd see changes in his EKG, his blood pressure readings. Which brings us to another concern, Diane interrupted. Your documentation of his vital signs shows remarkably stable readings. Too stable, some might say. The implication hit Olivia like a slap. You're accusing me of falsifying medical records. We're trying to understand how a patient could be non-compliant with critical cardiac medications without his primary nurse noticing, Dr. Chen said gently. Either you weren't monitoring him properly, or you were covering up his non-compliance. Neither of those things happened, Olivia insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. Dr. Chen, you know me. You know I would never... I thought I knew you, Dr. Chen said sadly, but this evidence suggests otherwise. I'm sorry, Olivia, but I have no choice. Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately. The words hit Olivia like a physical blow. No, please, let me explain. Let me show you my actual documentation. Compare it to what you're showing me. Security will escort you out, Diane said, barely concealing her satisfaction. You have 10 minutes to collect your personal belongings. Olivia stood on shaking legs, her mind still trying to process what was happening. Can I at least say goodbye to my patients, to Edward? Absolutely not, Diane said firmly. You're no longer authorized to have patient contact. But he's expecting me. He'll be worried. Mr. Langford will be informed that his care has been transferred to a more qualified nurse, Diane said. I'll be taking over his case personally. The security guard who appeared at the door was gentle, but firm, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Olivia followed him to the staff locker room, her legs moving automatically while her mind remained frozen in shock as she gathered her few personal items, her knitting bag, her water bottle, the small photo of Marjorie she kept in her locker. Other staff members watched with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. Word traveled fast in a place like this, and she could already hear the whispers starting. I heard she was falsifying records. Poor Mr. Langford, he was doing so well. I always thought she was too good to be true. The security guard walked her to the exit, his expression apologetic. I'm sorry, miss, for what it's worth. I never saw you do anything wrong. Thank you, Olivia whispered, though the words felt hollow. As she stood outside the clinic, clutching her knitting bag and fighting back tears. One of the junior nurses approached her hesitantly. "Olivia, are you okay?" It was Marcus, a young man who'd started the same week she had. He was kind and earnest, and she'd enjoyed their brief conversations during shift changes. "I've been better," she said, trying to smile. "Take care of yourself, Marcus." "Wait," he said, glancing around nervously. "I know you didn't do what they're saying. I've seen you with patients. You're not capable of neglect or fraud. Tell that to Diane," Olivia said bitterly. "There's something else," Marcus said, lowering his voice. "I overheard Diane talking to her assistant yesterday. She said something about teaching that little do-gooder a lesson and showing Dr. Chen what real nursing looks like." Olivia's heart sank. "She set me up." "I think so, but I can't prove it. And even if I could," he trailed off, looking miserable. "You can't risk your job," Olivia finished. "I understand." As she walked away from Sunrise Recovery Center, Olivia felt the weight of injustice settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She'd been so careful, so professional, so dedicated to her patients' well-being, and now she was being punished for doing exactly what she'd been hired to do. But her heart broke most of all for Edward. After everything he'd been through, after finally starting to trust someone again, she'd been ripped away from him without warning or explanation. He would think she'd abandoned him, just like everyone else in his life. As she reached her car, Olivia made a decision. She couldn't leave without saying goodbye, without explaining what had happened. Edward deserved that much. She pulled out her phone and dialed the clinic's main number, Sunrise Recovery Center. "Could you please connect me to Edward Langford's room? I'm sorry, but Mr. Langford has requested no calls. His new nurse feels it's best if he focuses on his recovery without distractions." Olivia closed her eyes, fighting back tears. Even this small kindness had been denied to her. She was about to hang up when she heard a familiar voice in the background. Edward, asking someone about her whereabouts. Before she could think better of it, she found herself speaking loud enough for him to hear. "Please tell him that Olivia had to leave unexpectedly, but she wants him to remember. Light, flower, and wind. Always light, flower, and wind." The line went dead, but Olivia hoped, prayed, that Edward had heard her message, that he would understand she hadn't chosen to leave him, and that somehow, some way, they would find their way back to each other. The truth had a way of surfacing, even when powerful people tried to bury it, and Olivia Carver wasn't ready to give up fighting for it. Edward Langford had made billions by trusting his instincts. And right now, every instinct he possessed was screaming that something was terribly wrong. 3 days had passed since Olivia's sudden departure, and the official story, that she'd been terminated for negligence, didn't add up. He sat in his penthouse suite, staring at the phone in his hand. Thomas Granger would be here within the hour, and Edward had never been more desperate for his old friend's legal expertise. The message Olivia had left, light, flower, and wind, echoed in his mind like a prayer, or perhaps a promise she knows, he thought. Somehow, she knows who she might be. The knock on his door was sharp and efficient. Diane Whitlow entered with the kind of brisk authority that immediately put Edward on edge. She'd been caring for him since Olivia's departure, and every interaction felt like a power struggle. "Good morning, Mr. Langford. Time for your medications." Edward accepted the small paper cup filled with pills. But instead of taking them immediately, he studied Diane's face. "I'd like to speak with Dr. Chen about Olivia Carver." "Miss, Carver is no longer employed here," Diane said curtly. "I'm your nurse now, and I can assure you that your care will be properly managed." "Properly managed," Edward repeated slowly. "What exactly was improper about her care?" Diane's jaw tightened. "She was negligent with your medications and falsified records. We have security footage and physical evidence." "Show me. I'm sorry. Show me this evidence. I want to see the footage, the records, everything." "That's not possible. Patient privacy regulations." "It's my privacy," Edward interrupted, "and I'm waiving it. I want to see what you have on Olivia Carver." Diane's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "Mr. Langford, I understand you may have developed an attachment to your former nurse, but she was negligent, and you could have been seriously hurt." "I wasn't hurt. In fact, I was better under her care than I've been in months." That's not what the medical records show. Before Edward could respond, there was another knock. Dr. Chen entered, looking troubled and tired. Mr. Langford, I understand you've been asking questions about Olivia's termination. I have, and I'm not satisfied with the answers. Dr. Chen glanced at Diane, who gave her a sharp look. I know this is difficult. When we develop relationships with our caregivers, it can be hard to accept that they may not have had our best interests at heart. That's bullshit, Edward said bluntly, his businessman's instincts taking over. I've been evaluating people for 40 years, and Olivia Carver is one of the most genuinely caring individuals I've ever met. She didn't falsify anything. The evidence suggests otherwise, Diane said firmly. Then your evidence is wrong or manufactured. Edward's voice carried the authority of a man who'd built an empire on reading people correctly. I want an independent investigation. Dr. Chen sighed. Mr. Langford, I understand your concerns, but the matter is closed. We have protocols. And I have lawyers, Edward interrupted. Good ones. If you're so confident in your evidence, you won't mind having it examined by experts. The threat hung in the air like a sword. Dr. Chen was clearly uncomfortable, but Diane's expression had hardened into something almost hostile. Are you threatening to sue us? Diane asked. I'm stating a fact. If an innocent woman was railroaded out of her job to satisfy someone's personal agenda, there will be consequences. Edward's gaze fixed on Diane. Legal consequences. After they left, Edward immediately called Thomas Granger. His lawyer arrived within the hour, looking concerned and carrying a leather briefcase that Edward hoped contained solutions. You sounded urgent on the phone, Thomas said, settling into the chair Olivia used to occupy. What's this about a wrongful termination? It's about more than that, Edward said. Tom, I think I've found her. I think I've found Sophie. Thomas went very still. Edward, we've been down this road before. Remember the girl in Texas, the one in Oregon? You can't keep... This is different. Edward leaned forward, his voice intense. She has Sophie's eyes, Tom. She knows our special phrase. Light, flower, and wind. She was found as a child, hurt, and with no memory, in Colorado. She's 28 years old. Those could be coincidences. She dreams about the tire swing. She remembers a man calling her Sunshine. She was raised by a woman who found her on a mountain road. Injured and alone. Edward's voice cracked. It's her, Tom. I know it's her. Thomas studied his friend's face, seeing a hope he hadn't witnessed in 25 years. What do you need from me? DNA testing. Discreet, fast, and accurate. And I need you to investigate what happened here. This woman, Olivia Carver, was fired on trumped-up charges. I want to know who's responsible and why. Edward, if she really is Sophie, someone went to a lot of trouble to hide her 25 years ago. Firing her might be connected to your discovery. The thought sent a chill through Edward's bones. You think someone knows? I think we need to be very careful. If powerful people were involved in Sophie's disappearance, they might not want the truth coming out now. Thomas opened his briefcase and pulled out a tablet. Tell me everything you remember about Olivia's dismissal. Every detail. Edward recounted the events of the past few days. From Olivia's sudden termination to the suspicious nature of the evidence against her. Thomas took notes, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. This Diane Whitlow, Thomas said. How long has she been here? 15 years, according to Dr. Chen. She's the head nurse. And she took over Olivia's case personally. Yes. She seemed almost eager to do it. Thomas made another note. I'll need to run background checks on everyone involved. If someone's trying to silence Olivia, we need to know who and why. How long for the DNA results? If I pull the right strings, 24 hours. But Edward, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this isn't Sophie. The coincidences are compelling. But it's her, Edward said with quiet certainty. I know it's her. While Thomas made calls to arrange the DNA testing, Edward found himself drawn to the window. Somewhere out there, Olivia was probably struggling to understand what had happened to her. She'd been punished for doing her job well, for caring too much, for being exactly the kind of person the world needed more of. And if she really is Sophie, he thought, she's been punished for something else entirely, for being my daughter. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Langford, this is Marcus from the clinic. I have information about what happened to Olivia. Meet me at the Starbucks on Main Street at 7 p.m. Come alone. Edward showed the message to Thomas, who frowned. Could be a trap. Or it could be someone with a conscience who wants to help. I don't like it. If we're right about this being connected to Sophie's disappearance, meeting unknown contacts could be dangerous. Then come with me, Edward said. But I'm going. If someone has information that could clear Olivia's name, I need to hear it. At 7 o'clock, Edward and Thomas sat in the corner of the Starbucks, nursing coffee and watching the door. Marcus arrived exactly on time, a young man with kind eyes and nervous energy. Thank you for coming, he said, sliding into the seat across from them. I wasn't sure you'd believe me. Tell us what you know, Thomas said. Marcus glanced around nervously. I overheard Diane talking to her assistant the day before Olivia was fired. She said something about teaching that little do-gooder a lesson and proving to Dr. Chen that traditional nursing methods were superior. Did she say anything else? Edward asked. She mentioned having evidence that would be impossible to dispute. But here's the thing. I saw Olivia administer Mr. Langford's medications that afternoon. She was meticulous, just like always. She stood there and watched him take every pill. Then how do you explain the security footage? Thomas asked. Marcus's expression darkened. Diane has administrative access to the security system. She can edit footage, change timestamps, even delete recordings. I've seen her do it before when she wanted to cover up her own mistakes. Would you be willing to testify to that? Thomas asked. I don't know. I need this job. But what happened to Olivia isn't right. She's one of the best nurses I've ever worked with. Edward leaned forward. What if I told you that your testimony could prevent an innocent woman from having her life destroyed? Marcus met his gaze and saw something there that made him straighten his shoulders. Then I'd say it's worth the risk. As they left the coffee shop, Thomas put a hand on Edward's shoulder. If Olivia really is Sophie, we're dealing with something much bigger than a wrongful termination. Someone's been hiding the truth for 25 years, and they're willing to destroy lives to keep it hidden. Then we'd better find out who, Edward said grimly, before they destroy any more lives. Back in his hotel room, Edward stared at the phone, wanting desperately to call Olivia, but knowing he couldn't risk putting her in more danger. Tomorrow, he'd have the DNA results. Tomorrow, he might finally know if his daughter was alive. But tonight, he could only wait and hope that 25 years of prayers were finally being answered. The DNA results sat on Edward's coffee table like a loaded gun. The sealed envelope containing 25 years of hope and fear. Thomas had delivered them personally, his expression unreadable as he handed over the document that would either reunite a father with his daughter or shatter the last piece of Edward's heart. Before you open it, Thomas said quietly, I need to tell you what I found about Marjorie Ellis. Edward's hand froze over the envelope. What kind of information? The kind that changes everything. Thomas pulled out a thick folder. Marjorie Ellis wasn't just a good Samaritan who found a lost child. She was paid to disappear with that child. The words hit Edward like a physical blow. Paid? By whom? That's where it gets complicated. Thomas opened the folder, revealing bank records, old photographs, and legal documents. In 1998, Marjorie received a wire transfer of $50,000 from a shell company called Mountain Vista Holdings. The transaction was dated September 20th, 1998, 5 days after Sophie disappeared. Edward's mind raced. Mountain Vista Holdings, I've never heard of it. It took some digging, but I traced it back. The shell company was registered to a law firm in Denver, which handled the transaction on behalf of an unnamed client. But here's the interesting part. The same law firm handled Evelyn's divorce proceedings. The name hit Edward like a sledgehammer. Evelyn. It gets worse, I found this in Marjorie's personal effects. Thomas handed Edward a yellowed letter, the handwriting elegant but cold. Read it. Edward's hands shook as he unfolded the paper. The letter was dated September 18th, 1998, just 3 days after Sophie's disappearance. Mrs. Ellis. As discussed, the child is to be relocated immediately. You will register her as your biological daughter and ensure no questions are asked about her origins. The head injury will serve as explanation for any memory issues. You are never to contact the family or reveal the truth about her identity. In exchange for your silence and cooperation, you will receive the agreed-upon compensation. Any breach of this agreement will result in serious legal consequences. The child's welfare depends on your discretion. Regards. EP. Edward's vision blurred as the full horror of what he was reading sank in. EP. Evelyn Prescott, my ex-wife, orchestrated this. Edward, I'm sorry. I know this is... She took her. Edward's voice was barely a whisper. Evelyn took our daughter and threw her away like garbage. Let me believe she was dead for 25 years while Sophie was out there. Alive, growing up without us. Thomas watched his friend process the devastating revelation. There's more. I found records of other payments to Marjorie over the years. Smaller amounts, but regular. It looks like Evelyn was making sure she stayed quiet. And when Marjorie died 3 years ago, the payments stopped. Which might explain why Olivia ended up working at a clinic where she'd cross paths with you. Maybe Marjorie's death removed the last barrier keeping Sophie hidden. Edward stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below, Aspen bustled with its usual mix of tourists and locals. People going about their normal lives while his world crumbled and rebuilt itself simultaneously. Why? He asked, his voice breaking. Why would Evelyn do this to our child? I think I know. Thomas hesitated, then pulled out another document. Your original will, dated 1997. You were planning to leave 70% of your estate to Sophie when she turned 18. Edward nodded. I wanted to make sure she'd never want for anything. Evelyn stood to inherit everything if Sophie was out of the picture. With your daughter gone, she became your primary beneficiary, but we divorced anyway. She didn't get the money. No, but she did get revenge, and she ensured that Sophie would never come forward to claim her inheritance. Thomas's voice was grim. It was never about the money, Edward. It was about making sure you suffered for the rest of your life. Edward closed his eyes. 25 years of grief and guilt washing over him in waves. All those nights he'd blamed himself. All those years of thinking he'd failed to protect his daughter. And the truth was that the person who should have loved Sophie most had been the one to destroy her childhood. Open the envelope, Thomas said gently. You need to know for certain. With trembling hands, Edward broke the seal and pulled out the lab report. The scientific language was dense and technical, but the conclusion was clear and unambiguous. Probability of paternity, 99,997%, based on the DNA analysis of the provided samples. Edward Langford is the biological father of the individual identified as Olivia Carver with virtual certainty. Edward sank into his chair, the paper falling from his nerveless fingers. She's alive. Sophie's alive. She's alive, Thomas confirmed. And she's been living 20 minutes away from here for years. I have to see her. I have to tell her everything. Edward, wait. Thomas's voice was urgent. Think about what we're dealing with. Evelyn orchestrated a kidnapping and child abandonment. If she's still alive, if she finds out that Sophie has been discovered, what do you think she'll do? Edward's blood ran cold. She'll try to silence her, just like she did with Olivia's firing. Exactly. We need to be careful about how we approach this. Sophie, Olivia, is in danger as long as Evelyn doesn't know we've connected the dots. Where is Evelyn now? That's what I'm trying to find out. She remarried in 2005, moved to Switzerland, but I've lost track of her in recent years. Edward's phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Having trouble sleeping. Try counting sheep instead of counting your mistakes. Both men stared at the phone. That's not a random spam message, Thomas said grimly. Someone's watching us, Edward realized. Someone knows we're getting close to the truth. Another text arrived. Some secrets are buried for good reason. Stop digging, or the girl pays the price. Edward's hands clenched into fists. They're threatening Sophie. We need to get her somewhere safe, Thomas said, pulling out his phone. I'll call my security team. No. Edward stood, his businessman's instincts kicking in. If we move too obviously, they'll know we're onto them. We need to be smarter than that. What do you suggest? I'm going to see Sophie tonight. I'm going to tell her who she is and what's happening. She deserves to know the truth. Edward, that's exactly what they're expecting you to do. Then we'll have to outthink them. Edward moved to his laptop, his fingers flying over the keyboard. I've been playing defense for 25 years. It's time to go on offense. Meanwhile, across town, Olivia sat in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling and unable to sleep. The dreams had been getting stronger since her dismissal from the clinic, more vivid and detailed. She could see the garden now, could hear the man's voice calling her name. Not Olivia, but something else. Something that started with an S. Her phone rang, startling her from her reverie. The caller ID showed Edward's name. Mr. Langford, she answered, surprised. Olivia, I need to see you, it's important. I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not supposed to have contact with former patients, and after what happened at the clinic. What happened at the clinic was a lie? You were set up. Edward's voice was urgent. I have proof. Proof. Olivia, I need to tell you something about your past, about who you really are. Can you meet me tonight? Her heart began to race. Edward, you're scaring me. I'm scared too, but I promise you, everything I'm about to tell you is true. Meet me at the old chapel on Maroon Creek Road. 1 hour. Why there? Because it's the only place I can think of where we might be safe. After he hung up, Olivia sat staring at the phone, her mind spinning. The chapel on Maroon Creek Road was where Marjorie's funeral had been held 3 years ago. It was isolated, peaceful, and far enough from town that they wouldn't be disturbed. As she got dressed, Olivia caught sight of herself in the mirror. For the first time in years, she really looked at her reflection, not as Olivia Carver, the nurse from Durango, but as someone whose past was hidden in shadows and half-remembered dreams. Who am I really? She wondered. And why do I feel like I'm about to find out? The chapel sat on a hill overlooking the valley, its steeple silhouetted against the star-filled sky. As Olivia pulled into the parking lot, she saw Edward's car already there, and her heart began to pound with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Whatever truth Edward was about to reveal, she knew it would change everything. The girl who had walked into that chapel would not be the same person who walked out, in the shadows beyond the parking lot. Another car sat with its lights off, its occupant watching through night vision binoculars. The time for secrets was ending, and some people would do anything to keep the truth buried. But 25 years of silence was about to be broken, and not even the darkness could hide the light that was about to shine. The chapel's interior was bathed in moonlight streaming through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the wooden pews. Edward stood at the altar, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared at the simple cross above. When Olivia entered, her footsteps echoing in the sacred silence, he turned to face her. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You said you had proof about what happened at the clinic," Olivia said, though something in his expression told her this conversation would go far deeper than workplace politics. Edward gestured to the front pew. "Please, sit. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about yourself." Olivia settled onto the worn wooden bench, her heart racing. "Edward, you're frightening me." "I'm frightened too." He sat beside her, close enough that she could see the tears gathering in his eyes. "Olivia, I need you to prepare yourself for something that's going to sound impossible. Just tell me." Edward pulled out a manila envelope, his hands shaking as he opened it. 3 days ago, I had DNA tests run, yours and mine. He handed her the lab report. "You're not Olivia Carver. You're Sophie Langford. You're my daughter." The words hit her like a physical blow. Olivia stared at the document, the scientific terminology blurring through her tears. That's impossible. I know it sounds insane, but look at the evidence. The DNA match is 99,097%. You know our special phrase, light, flower, and wind. Something I never told another soul. You dream about the tire swing in my garden. You remember someone calling you sunshine. Olivia's hands shook as she held the paper. But I was found in Colorado. Marjorie said I was hurt, that I'd been abandoned. You weren't abandoned, Edward said gently. Edward, you were taken, stolen from me by someone I trusted more than anyone else in the world. He pulled out another document, the letter from EP to Marjorie Ellis. My ex-wife, Evelyn Prescott, orchestrated your kidnapping. She paid Marjorie to take you away, to hide you, to make sure you'd never come home to me. Olivia read the letter, her world tilting on its axis. She took me from you. But why? Money, control, revenge. Edward's voice was bitter. I was planning to leave most of my estate to you when you turned 18. With you gone, Evelyn stood to inherit everything. But more than that, she wanted to punish me for our failing marriage. She knew the best way to destroy me was to take away the thing I loved most. And Marjorie, she knew. She knew she was paid to keep you hidden, to raise you as her own daughter. The head injury you suffered, that was real, probably from when they took you. It explains why you don't remember your life before. Olivia stood abruptly. Pacing to the window, outside, the mountains stood silent and eternal, witnesses to secrets that had been buried for 25 years. This is insane. I can't be. I'm not. You are, Edward said firmly. You're Sophie Langford. You're my sunshine, my little girl who used to swing on the tire swing and beg for one more story before bed. You're the daughter I've mourned for 25 years. But if this is true, why now? Why did I end up at your clinic? Edward's expression darkened. Because Marjorie died 3 years ago. The payments from Evelyn stopped. Without her guardian watching over you, you were free to find your own path. And somehow, that path led you back to me. Or someone led me there, Olivia said, her nurse's mind working through the implications. My firing, it wasn't really about negligence, was it? No. Someone wanted to separate us before we could figure out the truth, but they underestimated how much we'd already connected. Olivia sank back onto the pew, overwhelmed. I don't know how to process this. 28 years of my life, and it's all been based on a lie. Not all of it, Edward said gently. Marjorie loved you. That much is clear from everything you've told me about her. She may have been paid to take you, but she raised you with genuine affection. You became her daughter in every way that mattered. But she lied to me every day for 23 years she lied. She was protecting you and herself. Edward pulled out more documents from Thomas's investigation. Look at this. After you were taken, Evelyn had me investigated by private detectives. She was looking for any excuse to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could gain control of my assets. If I'd found you, if I'd tried to reclaim you, she would have destroyed both of us. Olivia studied the private investigators' reports, seeing her father's pain documented in cold, clinical language. Subject exhibits signs of severe depression, obsessive behavior regarding missing child. Recommend continued surveillance. She was watching you, she whispered, making sure you never got too close to the truth. And when you started working at the clinic, when we began to connect, someone panicked. Someone, you mean Evelyn? Edward's jaw tightened. I don't know yet. Thomas is trying to locate her now. She remarried and moved to Switzerland years ago, but we lost track of her recently. Olivia's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Lovely chapel. Such a shame if something happened to it during your little reunion. Both of them stared at the message. Someone's watching us, Olivia whispered. We need to get out of here, Edward said, standing. Now. As they moved toward the door, another text arrived. Not so fast. We need to talk. Come to the parking lot. Alone, both of you. Don't, Olivia said, grabbing Edward's arm. It's a trap. If we run, they'll just follow us. And if they're willing to threaten us publicly, they're desperate enough to do anything. They stepped out of the chapel together, the cool mountain air sharp against their faces. The parking lot was empty except for their cars and the shadows cast by the surrounding trees. Hello, Edward. The voice came from behind them, cultured and cold. They turned to see a woman stepping out of the shadows, still elegant at 65, with perfectly styled silver hair and designer clothes that couldn't hide the hardness in her eyes. Evelyn, Edward breathed. Hello, darling. You look terrible. 25 years of guilt will do that to a person. Olivia stared at the woman who had destroyed her childhood. You're her. You're the one who took me. I saved you, Evelyn said coldly. Do you have any idea what your life would have been like with him? Edward was obsessed with business, never home, never present. I did you a favor. You threw me away like garbage, Olivia said, her voice shaking with rage. You let me grow up thinking I was nobody, that I belonged nowhere. And look how well you turned out. A caring, compassionate nurse. Do you think you would have developed those qualities growing up in a mansion with servants catering to your every whim? That wasn't your choice to make, Edward said, stepping protectively in front of Olivia. She was my daughter, my choice. Your daughter was a mistake, Evelyn snapped. A product of your midlife crisis, your desperate need to create a legacy. She was better off without you. Then why are you here? Olivia challenged. If you really believe that, why not let us be? Evelyn's mask slipped, revealing the calculation beneath. Because mistakes have a way of coming back to haunt you, and I've worked too hard to build my new life to let old secrets destroy it. What do you want? Edward asked. I want you to disappear. Again. Both of you. Take your reunion and your DNA tests and find somewhere far away to play happy family. Stop asking questions, stop digging into the past, and I'll leave you alone. And if we refuse, Evelyn smiled, but it was cold and predatory. Then you'll discover just how far I'm willing to go to protect what's mine. She turned and walked back toward the shadows, then paused. Oh, and Edward, that little scene at the clinic with the falsified records, that was just a warning. I have resources you can't imagine and connections you wouldn't believe. Cross me, and I'll destroy her so thoroughly that even you won't be able to put the pieces back together. As her footsteps faded into the darkness, Edward and Olivia stood in the parking lot, holding each other against the weight of 25 years of lies and the threat of worse to come. What do we do now? Olivia whispered. We fight, Edward said firmly. We fight for the truth, for justice, and for the family we should have had all along. She's dangerous. Edward, she's already proven what she's capable of. Then we'll have to be more dangerous than she is. The war room Thomas Granger had set up in Edward's penthouse suite looked like something from a legal thriller. Documents spread across every surface, laptops displaying financial records, and a whiteboard covered with connections between names, dates, and bank transfers. For the past 3 days, they'd been building their case against Evelyn Prescott, and the picture emerging was more damning than Edward had ever imagined. She's been busy, Thomas said, pointing to a timeline on the whiteboard. After taking Sophie, Evelyn didn't just disappear. She spent years covering her tracks, bribing officials, and building a network of people who owed her favors. Olivia sat curled in the chair she'd claimed as her own, a steaming mug of coffee warming her hands. The revelation of her true identity had shaken her to her core, but she'd found strength in having a purpose, helping to expose the woman who'd stolen her childhood. What about the clinic? She asked. Have you found the connection between Evelyn and Diane? That's where it gets interesting, Thomas said, pulling up a file on his laptop. Diane Whitlow received a payment of $25,000 3 days before you were fired. The money came from a Swiss account registered to EIP Holdings. So Evelyn paid Diane to frame me, Olivia said, though hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the gut. It gets worse, Edward said grimly. Show her the rest, Tom. Thomas pulled up another document. Diane's been feeding information to Evelyn for months. Patient records, staff schedules, even security footage. She's been watching you since the day you started working there. Watching me. But how did she even know I existed? Because Evelyn never stopped monitoring Marjorie Ellis, Thomas explained. When Marjorie died, Evelyn's people kept tabs on you, the moment you applied for a job at a clinic where you might encounter Edward. Alarms went off. The scope of the surveillance made Olivia's skin crawl. So everything, my getting that job, meeting Edward, even being fired, it was all orchestrated. Not orchestrated, Edward corrected. Evelyn reacted to what was happening, but she couldn't control the most important thing, our connection. She couldn't prevent us from recognizing each other. Speaking of recognition, Thomas said, we've had a breakthrough, Marcus, that young nurse who helped us. He's agreed to testify about what he witnessed. And more importantly, he's willing to go on record about Diane's access to the security system. Will his testimony be enough? Olivia asked. Combined with the financial records and the DNA evidence, yes, but here's the thing. We can't just expose Evelyn's recent crimes. We need to prove the original kidnapping. That's where the real justice lies. Edward stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains where his daughter had been hidden for 25 years. What do we have on the original crime? Marjorie's records, Thomas said, pulling out a thick folder. Before she died, she kept everything. The original payment, correspondence with Evelyn's lawyers, even medical records from when Sophie was injured during the kidnapping. Injured how? Olivia asked, though she dreaded the answer. You fought them, Edward said quietly. According to the medical records, you had defensive wounds on your hands and arms. You didn't go quietly. Olivia closed her eyes, trying to reach back into those blocked memories. Sometimes, in her dreams, she could almost remember the terror, The confusion, the pain, but the details remained frustratingly out of reach. "There's something else," Thomas said carefully. "Marjorie kept a journal. In the final entries, she talks about her guilt, about wanting to tell you the truth before she died. She also mentions that she wasn't the only one who knew." "What do you mean?" "There was someone else involved in the kidnapping. Someone who helped Evelyn plan it. Marjorie refers to them as the doctor." Edward's blood ran cold. "Dr. Morrison, my cardiologist. He's been treating me for years. Would have had access to my medical records, my schedule." "We're checking into it," Thomas said. "But if he's involved, it means Evelyn's network is deeper than we thought." A knock at the door interrupted them. Edward opened it to find Marcus standing in the hallway, looking nervous but determined. "I'm sorry to bother you, but there's been a development at the clinic," he said. "Dr. Chen called an emergency meeting. She's announcing that they're launching an internal investigation into Olivia's termination." "That's good news," Olivia said, standing. "Maybe," Marcus said uncertainly. "But here's the weird part. Diane seemed happy about it, like she was expecting it." Thomas and Edward exchanged glances. "It's a trap," Edward said. "Evelyn's forcing a confrontation. Then we'll be ready for it," Olivia said firmly. "Thomas, can you get the evidence to Dr. Chen before the meeting?" "I can do better than that," Thomas said with a smile. "I can get it to the FBI, financial crimes, kidnapping, conspiracy. This is way beyond the clinic's jurisdiction now." "How long do we have?" Edward asked. "The meeting's tomorrow at 2 p.m. Dr. Chen wants all parties present. You, Olivia, Diane, and any witnesses." After Marcus left, the three of them sat in the gathering darkness, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Olivia spoke. "I want to be there when you confront Evelyn. I want to look her in the eye when she realizes her 25 years of lies are finally catching up with her. Sophie, it could be dangerous. My name is Olivia," she said firmly. "I've been Olivia Carver for 25 years, and that's who I am. Sophie was a little girl who was stolen from her family. I'm a grown woman who's going to help bring her kidnapper to justice." Edward smiled, seeing in her determination the same fierce spirit that had made his 5-year-old daughter fight her captors. "Then we'll face her together." "There's one more thing," Thomas said. "I've been in contact with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. They're very interested in Evelyn's Swiss accounts and her pattern of using money to silence people. If we can prove she's been laundering money or evading taxes, then we have her on federal charges," Edward finished. "Something she can't buy her way out of." "Exactly. But we need to be careful. If Evelyn realizes we're closing in, she might run. Or worse, she might decide that if she's going down, she's taking you both with her." As if summoned by their conversation, Edward's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Enjoying your little reunion. Tomorrow's meeting should be interesting. I do hope you're prepared for what's coming." "She knows," Olivia said, reading over his shoulder. "Of course she knows," Edward replied. "She's been watching us this whole time." "Then tomorrow we end this," Olivia said. "One way or another." Thomas gathered his papers, preparing to leave. "I'll have FBI agents positioned around the clinic tomorrow. If Evelyn makes any threats or tries to run, they'll be ready. And if she doesn't show," Edward asked, "then we'll find her. There's nowhere she can hide from federal charges." After Thomas left, Edward and Olivia sat together in the quiet suite. Father and daughter finally reunited, but still processing the magnitude of what they'd lost and what they'd found. "Are you ready for this?" Edward asked. "I've been ready for 25 years, Olivia replied. "I just didn't know it. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that finding you, getting you back, is worth any risk. I know." "Dad," she said, the word feeling strange and wonderful on her tongue. "I know." Outside, the mountains stood sentinel over their valley, keeping watch over secrets that would soon be revealed and justice that would finally be served. Tomorrow would bring answers, confrontation, and the end of a quarter-century of lies. But tonight, a father and daughter sat together in the darkness, preparing for the battle that would determine whether love could triumph over the deepest betrayal imaginable. The conference room at Sunrise Recovery Center buzzed with tension as people filed in for what was supposed to be a routine administrative hearing. Dr. Chen sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 members of the clinic's board of directors. Diane Whitlow occupied the seat across from them, her expression confident despite the circumstances. She'd spent the morning preparing her defense, certain that her fabricated evidence would stand up to scrutiny. What she didn't know was that FBI agents were positioned throughout the building, and Thomas Granger had already delivered a comprehensive file of evidence to the authorities. Olivia entered the room with Edward at her side, her head held high despite the whispers that followed her. She'd chosen to wear the simple blue dress she'd worn to Marjorie's funeral, a reminder of the woman who'd raised her with love, even if that love had been built on a lie. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Chen began, "we're here to review the circumstances surrounding Miss Carver's termination and the allegations of professional misconduct. I want to assure everyone that we're committed to getting to the truth." "The truth is already clear," Diane interjected. "Ms. Carver was negligent in her duties, falsified medical records, and put a patient at risk. The evidence is irrefutable." "Is it?" Thomas Granger stood from his seat at the back of the room. "Because I have evidence that tells a very different story." Dr. Chen looked surprised. "Mr. Granger, I wasn't aware you'd be representing Miss Carver." "I'm not just representing her," Thomas said, moving to the front of the room. "I'm representing the truth. And the truth is that Mrs. Carver was framed by someone with access to your security systems and a very compelling motive to destroy her reputation." He placed a thick folder on the table. "This contains financial records showing that Ms. Whitlow received $25,000 from a Swiss bank account 3 days before Ms. Carver's termination. It also contains testimony from staff members who witnessed Miss Whitlow's hostile behavior toward Ms. Carver." Diane's face went pale. That's preposterous. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you?" Thomas opened the folder and pulled out bank statements. EP Holdings, registered in Geneva. The same account that's been used to make payments to various individuals over the past 25 years, all connected to one person. Evelyn Prescott. The name hung in the air like a thunderbolt. Dr. Chen leaned forward. "Who is Evelyn Prescott?" "Edward Langford's ex-wife," Thomas replied, "and the woman who orchestrated the kidnapping of his 5-year-old daughter 25 years ago." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Diane half rose from her seat. "This is insane, you can't possibly—" "Sit down, Diane." Everyone turned toward the door. Evelyn Prescott stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, her silver hair perfectly styled. She looked like she belonged in a boardroom, not a confrontation about kidnapping and fraud. "Mrs. Prescott," Dr. Chen said uncertainly, "I'm not sure what you're doing here, but this is a closed hearing." "Oh, but it concerns me very directly," Evelyn said, walking into the room with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything. "After all, they're making some very serious accusations about me." She took a seat at the table, directly across from Edward and Olivia. "Hello, darling," she said to Edward. "You look better than when I saw you last." "Where's Dr. Morrison?" Edward asked coldly. "Ah, you figured that out, did you? Poor Harold is indisposed at the moment. Something about chest pains. Ironic, really, considering his specialty." Thomas pulled out his phone. "Dr. Chen, I need you to call security. Mrs. Prescott is here under false pretenses and—" "I'm here because I was invited," Evelyn interrupted. "Well, perhaps not invited, but certainly expected. You've been making such a fuss about the past, Edward. I thought it was time we cleared the air." She turned to Olivia, studying her with cold calculation. "You know, I always wondered what you'd look like grown up. You have your father's eyes, but you got your mother's stubborn streak, not your real mother, of course. That pitiful woman who raised you. Marjorie Ellis was more of a mother than you ever were," Olivia said, her voice shaking with rage. "Marjorie Ellis was a paid caretaker," Evelyn replied dismissively. "I gave her a job, and she did it well, though I suspect she grew rather fond of you toward the end. Her final letters suggested she was having second thoughts about our arrangement." "Final letters?" Thomas asked sharply. "Oh yes, she wrote to me several times before she died. Guilty conscience, I suppose. She wanted to tell you the truth, Sophie. Or should I say Olivia? I prefer Olivia. Sophie was such a troublesome child." Dr. Chen looked between them, clearly out of her depth. "I think we need to call the police." "This is far beyond—" "The police are already here," Agent Sarah Martinez announced as she entered the room, her FBI badge clearly visible. Mrs. Prescott, you're under arrest for conspiracy, kidnapping, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Evelyn laughed, a sound like breaking glass. How dramatic. But I'm afraid you'll find this more complicated than you think. Will we? Agent Martinez asked. Because we have 25 years of financial records, testimony from multiple witnesses, and DNA evidence proving that you orchestrated the kidnapping of Sophie Langford. DNA evidence proving that a child named Sophie existed. Yes, Evelyn agreed. But can you prove what happened to her? Can you prove that she didn't simply disappear? Edward stood, his hands clenched into fists. She's sitting right here, you psychotic bitch. Our daughter is alive and she's going to testify against you. Is she? Evelyn pulled out a small device that looked like a remote control. Because I have to ask, what's more important to you, Edward? Your daughter's life or your need for revenge? Agent Martinez's hand moved to her weapon. Ma'am, I need you to put that device down. This little thing, it's just a radio transmitter, but the person listening to it has been instructed to take certain actions if I don't check in within the next few minutes. You're bluffing, Olivia said, but her voice was uncertain. Am I? Tell me, dear, where do you think Marcus is right now? Such a sweet boy, so eager to help, so trusting when a nice woman offered him a ride home from work yesterday. Edward's blood ran cold. You're lying. I'm a lot of things, Edward, but I'm not a liar. Not about this. Evelyn's finger hovered over the button. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out of here with me, both of you. We're going to take a nice drive, and we're going to come to an understanding about how this story ends. Like hell we are, Agent Martinez said. You're surrounded, Mrs. Prescott. There's no way out. There's always a way out, Evelyn replied. The question is how many people have to die to create it. The room fell silent except for the sound of everyone's breathing. Finally, Edward spoke. What do you want? I want to disappear, again. I want new identities, clean papers, and enough money to live comfortably somewhere far away, in exchange, Marcus lives, and you get to keep your precious daughter. And if we refuse, Evelyn's smile was arctic, then you'll have a funeral to plan. And trust me, Edward, losing someone you love never gets easier. Thomas stepped forward. There's another option. What if we told you that your Swiss accounts have been frozen? That your assets are being seized as we speak? That even if you walk out of here, you'll have nothing? For the first time, Evelyn's composure cracked. You're lying. Am I? Check your phone. I'm sure you'll find some very interesting voicemails from your banker in Geneva. Evelyn pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she scrolled through her messages. The color drained from her face as she read. You destroyed me, she whispered. You destroyed yourself, Edward replied. 25 years ago, when you chose money over our daughter's life. Agent Martinez moved closer. Mrs. Prescott, put the device down. Whatever you've done, whatever you've planned, it's over. You're right, Evelyn said quietly. It is over. She looked directly at Olivia. I'm sorry, dear, if it's any consolation. I did love you once, when you were small, before you became inconvenient. Don't you dare, Olivia said, standing. Don't you dare try to make this about love. You threw me away. You let me grow up believing I was nobody. But look how strong you became, Evelyn said. Stronger than you ever would have been as a spoiled rich girl. I gave you character, Sophie. I gave you resilience. You gave me nothing, Olivia replied. Everything I am, everything good in me came from Marjorie. She may have been paid to take me, but she loved me with her whole heart. You never loved anyone but yourself. Evelyn's face crumpled, and for a moment, she looked like what she was. A frightened, desperate woman who'd spent 25 years running from the consequences of her choices. The device, Agent Martinez said firmly. Put it down. Evelyn looked at the remote in her hand, then at Edward and Olivia. You know what the funny thing is? I was never going to hurt Marcus. He's just a sweet boy who wanted to help. I'm not a monster, Edward. I'm just someone who made a terrible mistake and spent 25 years trying to cover it up. She placed the device on the table and raised her hands. It's over. All of it. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Evelyn looked at Olivia one last time. For what it's worth, I'm glad you found each other. I'm glad you got your family back. We're not a family yet, Olivia said quietly. But we're going to be. Edward stepped forward and took his daughter's hand. Yes, we are. We're going to be exactly the family we were meant to be. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of what had once been Sunrise Recovery Center, casting warm light across the construction crews working to transform the space. Olivia stood in what used to be the main lobby, watching as workers installed a new sign, Ellis House, a haven for healthcare workers. Second thoughts? Edward asked, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. Never, she replied, accepting the cup gratefully. Marjorie would have loved this, a place where people who dedicate their lives to caring for others can find support when they need it most. The transformation had been Olivia's idea. After the legal proceedings concluded, Evelyn sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, Diane stripped of her nursing license and facing criminal charges. Dr. Chen had made the decision to sell the clinic. The scandal had been too much for the facility to recover from, and she'd chosen to retire rather than rebuild. That's when Olivia had approached Edward with her proposal. Instead of claiming her inheritance immediately, she wanted to use the money to create something meaningful, a residential facility for healthcare workers who'd been victims of workplace harassment, fraud, or abuse, a place where they could find legal support, emotional healing, and a path back to their chosen profession. The intake coordinator position is still open, Edward said, watching as workers carried in furniture for the counseling offices. You could run the whole operation. I know, but I'm not ready to give up direct patient care yet, Olivia smiled, thinking of her new position at Denver General Hospital. Besides, someone needs to keep an eye on you. Your cardiologist says you're doing well, but stress management is still part of your treatment plan. Edward chuckled. Having my daughter back is the best stress management I could ask for. The past 6 months had been a journey of healing and discovery for both of them. Olivia had legally reclaimed her birth name, becoming Sophie Olivia Langford Carver, honoring both her true identity and the woman who'd raised her. Edward had started therapy to process 25 years of grief and guilt, learning to forgive himself for the tragedy that had never been his fault. Mr. Langford, Mrs. Langford. They turned to see Marcus approaching, no longer the nervous young nurse, but a confident advocate who'd become Ellis House's first program director. His testimony had been crucial in Evelyn's conviction, and Olivia had been thrilled when he'd accepted the position. The contractor wants to show you the memorial garden, he said. It's beautiful. They followed him outside to what had once been the clinic's parking lot. Now it was a peaceful garden with walking paths, benches, and a small memorial wall. At the center stood a bronze plaque dedicated to Marjorie Ellis, surrounded by flowers that would bloom in rotating seasons, ensuring that color and beauty would always be present. Light, flower, and wind, Olivia whispered, reading the inscription below Marjorie's name. She would have been so proud. She is proud, Edward said, putting his arm around his daughter. Wherever she is, she's watching over this place and everyone it's going to help. Thomas Granger joined them. Looking more relaxed than he had in months, the legal battles were finally over, and he'd found unexpected satisfaction in using his skills to help victims of corporate fraud and abuse. The first residents arrive next week, he announced. 3 nurses from different states, all dealing with workplace retaliation. We're going to make a real difference here. We already have, Olivia said. Marcus, how's the support group program developing? Better than expected. We've got healthcare workers from across the region wanting to participate. Some are dealing with harassment, others with burnout, and a few are whistleblowers who faced retaliation for reporting unsafe conditions. They need to know they're not alone. As they walked through the garden, Olivia's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. Saw the news story about Ellis House. Marjorie would be so proud. You're honoring her memory in the most beautiful way. The media attention had been intense during the trial, but it had also brought awareness to the issues Ellis House was designed to address. Healthcare workers across the country had reached out, sharing their own stories of workplace abuse and asking for support. What had started as a local project was becoming a national movement. There's something else, Thomas said, pulling out an envelope. This arrived yesterday. It's from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division. Olivia opened the letter, her eyes widening as she read. They recovered additional assets from Evelyn's accounts, money that was hidden in shell companies and offshore investments. How much? Edward asked. Enough to establish Ellis House locations in 5 more states, she replied, her voice filled with amazement. "We can help thousands of people." "Poetic justice," Marcus observed. "The money Evelyn stole from your family is now going to help the people she hurt." They spent the rest of the morning touring the facility, visiting the residential suites where guests would stay during their recovery, the legal aid offices where they'd receive support, and the therapy rooms where they'd begin to heal. Each space had been designed with warmth and comfort in mind, a stark contrast to the sterile medical environment that had once occupied the building. "You know what I love most about this place," Olivia said as they gathered in the main common area. "It's not just about fixing what's broken. It's about helping people remember who they were before the trauma and supporting them in becoming who they're meant to be." "Speaking of becoming who we're meant to be," Edward said, "I have something for you." He handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a pendant that took her breath away, a tiny charm combining a light beam, a flower, and a swirl of wind. "Dad," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I had it made after we found each other," he said. "A reminder that love doesn't have an expiration date, that even when we're separated by time and distance and lies, the bonds that matter most will always find a way to survive." Olivia fastened the necklace around her throat, feeling the weight of the charm against her heart. "Light, flower, and wind. Always," Edward agreed. "No matter what comes next, we'll face it together." A year later, Ellis House had become a model for healthcare worker advocacy across the nation. Olivia had left her hospital position to become the organization's national director, traveling the country to establish new locations and speak at conferences about workplace rights and patient safety. Edward had returned to his business empire, but with a different focus. The Langford Foundation now funded healthcare worker protection programs, whistleblower support services, and legal aid for those facing retaliation. He'd found that using his wealth and influence to help others gave him more satisfaction than any real estate deal ever had. On a warm spring evening, father and daughter sat in the memorial garden at the original Ellis House, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. The facility was full, its residents working with counselors and legal advocates to reclaim their lives and careers. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never found each other?" Olivia asked. "Every day," Edward replied. "But then I remember that we did find each other, against all odds. Despite all the lies and years of separation, we found our way back to each other. Because true love never fades," Olivia said, touching the pendant at her throat. "Because true love never fades," Edward agreed. "Light, flower, and wind, Sophie. Always light, flower, and wind." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence. A father and daughter who'd lost 25 years, but found something even more precious: the knowledge that love, real love, can survive anything. The Ellis House motto, carved in stone at the entrance, captured their journey perfectly. From darkness to light, from despair to hope, from isolation to family, every ending is a new beginning. And in the garden where Marjorie Ellis was remembered, where broken lives were being healed, and where love had conquered the deepest betrayal. That motto felt like a promise that would endure forever,